It began with stillness, an unusual quietness for Easter Monday. But that silence quickly broke into waves of sorrow as word spread from the Vatican. Pope Francis had passed away, aged 88. Just the day before, he had appeared at the Easter Sunday liturgy in St. Peter's Square. Though visibly frail, seated in his wheelchair, he offered blessings with warmth that moved the thousands who had come to celebrate Christ's resurrection. Few could imagine that within hours, the Catholic Church would be without its shepherd. It was Cardinal Frel who made the solemn announcement. With great reverence, he declared that the Holy Father had returned to the embrace of the God he had served with humility and courage. Around the globe, tears fell, not just for a man, but for what he represented, a papacy of compassion, simplicity, and fearless moral clarity. His final appearance was powerful in its gentleness. Carried slowly around St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis stopped often to offer blessings, touching infants brought forward by weeping parents, raising his frail hand in peace, his face lit by something eternal. Though age had claimed his strength, his spirit remained undimmed. He could no longer proclaim his message in his own voice. Instead, it was shared by an aide. And what came through that voice was, as many now believe. His final homily to the world, he did not speak of church structures, theology, or politics. Instead, he made a plea, a cry from a weary soul for the world to choose mercy. It was a farewell unlike any other, soft but urgent, humble yet profound. And hours later, at exactly 7:35 a.m. on Easter Monday, the Vatican confirmed what many could scarcely grasp, that Pope Francis had passed away peacefully. He had battled illness in recent months, particularly a severe infection in both lungs that worsened due to a childhood surgery in Argentina, which had left him with only one lung. Still, even in his final days, he had never stopped ministering. Born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires to Italian immigrants, the man who would one day be called the Bishop of Rome began his life far removed from the grand corridors of the Vatican. He worked ordinary jobs. He served as a nightclub bouncer. He spent time as a chemical technician. He was a young man wrestling with meaning, until a quiet yet irresistible call led him into the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. That call would take him on a lifelong journey of discipline, prayer, and service. In 2013, it led him to an election that would shock the world. For the first time in over 1,000 years, the Pope would not be from Europe. He would not be surrounded by aristocracy or tradition. He would be a Jesuit, a man from the ends of the earth. From the moment of his election, Pope Francis began rewriting what it meant to be Pope, not in theology, but in posture. He refused the grand apartments, choosing a modest room in the Vatican guest house. He shunned limousine processions and golden thrones, opting instead for public transport and humility. He constantly reminded the world that leadership in the church is not a right, but a responsibility to serve the most vulnerable. He knelt to wash the feet of prisoners. He embraced the sick and the disfigured without hesitation. He visited war zones, refugee camps, and poverty-stricken barrios, always choosing to be near the world forgets. When a pope dies, centuries of tradition unfold with precise reverence. A senior Vatican official, the Camerlengo, must approach the body, calling out the baptismal name 3 times. If no response comes, the death is confirmed. The fisherman's ring, symbol of papal authority, is then destroyed, marking the end of his temporal power. But Pope Francis, always one to choose humility over pageantry, had long prepared a different script. He requested no display of his body atop the traditional catafalque. Instead, he asked for a simple wooden coffin lined with zinc. He declined the use of the ornate triple coffin tradition, and rather than being buried in the crypt of St. Peter's Basilica alongside previous popes, he asked to be laid to rest in the Basilica of St. Mary Major, a place he visited countless times to pray before the Virgin Mary. It was a final gesture that spoke volumes. He would be buried not in splendor, but among the people. Within hours, tributes surged across every border and denomination. World leaders paused to reflect. Faith communities gathered to mourn. News outlets ran hours of programming in remembrance. Ursula von der Leyen, president of the European Commission, called him a bridge builder who transcended religious lines. Italy's prime minister described him as not only a spiritual leader, but a moral one. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance remembered his final meeting with the Pope just hours before his passing, and the deep reverence shared by millions of Christians across the globe. But it was the people who knew him only from afar, those in slums, villages, shelters, and streets, who cried the deepest. They had seen in him a father, a brother, a reflection of Christ. As preparations began for his funeral, attention turned toward the conclave, the sacred gathering of the College of Cardinals, tasked with choosing a new pontiff. Cloaked in centuries of tradition, the process is both political and profoundly spiritual. Each cardinal enters the Sistine Chapel bearing not only the weight of history, but the weight of future generations. Beneath Michelangelo's Last Judgment, they cast their vote with trembling hands, knowing it is not popularity, but discernment that must guide them. What comes next is unknown, but one truth remains. Whoever follows Pope Francis will inherit not merely the chair of Peter, but a legacy of radical compassion. From the alleys of Manila to the cathedrals of Paris, candles are lit. In remote villages, masses are offered. In great cities, choirs rehearse funeral hymns. The world is watching, not just for the rise of white smoke, but for a sign of where the church will go next. Will the next pope continue Francis's mission of walking with the poor, confronting environmental decay, or will the pendulum swing back toward formality, structure, and tradition? This is more than a Catholic event, more than a papal funeral. This is a moment of human reflection. Pope Francis was a spiritual conscience in a world too quick to forget the forgotten. He spoke to presidents and prisoners with the same tone. He reminded the world that power should be wielded with tenderness and that no life is too small to matter. His last message still resounds, a call for peace, a rebuke of violence, a prayer for unity, not in uniformity, but in shared humanity. Even in death, he speaks. The day of the funeral will not echo with pomp, but with prayer. There will be no gold casket, no royal procession. There will be a plain wooden coffin, the scent of incense, the sound of the Kyrie, and a church mourning a man who lived what he preached. It will not be a spectacle. It will be a sermon without words, a final testimony to a life of surrender. A shepherd must smell like his sheep, he once said, and he did. He was present, in suffering, in silence, in simplicity. He reminded the church to leave the palace and return to the street, to build bridges, not walls, to cry with the broken and laugh with the poor, to be not admired, but available. As the cardinals enter the Sistine Chapel, they carry not just Francis's legacy, but a challenge. Will the church remain a field hospital for wounded souls? Will it continue to whisper hope into the ears of the forgotten? Will it live the gospel not as a ceremony, but as a calling? These are not questions only for cardinals. They are for us all. Soon, The world will see the smoke, black, then white. A name will be called from the balcony. The crowds will cheer. But long after the applause fades, what Francis stood for must endure. In refugee camps, his face is still remembered. In hospitals, his words of care still comfort. In classrooms, his warnings about greed and indifference still echo. His greatness was not in what he ruled, but in how he served. He leaves no marble monument, but millions of changed hearts. He lived the gospel in motion. He taught us that holiness wears old shoes, that saints can smile, that love speaks louder than policy, that to lead is to kneel, that to believe is to love, and that to be Christian is not to dominate, but to walk beside. As the sun sets on this chapter, we do not mourn the ending, we honor the echo. In the words he lived, the joy of the gospel fills the hearts of those who encounter Jesus. May that joy, the kind that comes not from power, but from peace, live on through us. Farewell, Holy Father. May your path be filled with light, and may the work you began in love continue in us.